The first thing I noticed was her hands shaking as she wiped her tears, sitting across from a man who was clearly already checking his phone, already halfway gone. That was the moment I realized this blind date wasn't just awkward, it was breaking her, and somehow, before I knew why, I felt like I was about to be pulled into a story I couldn't ignore until the very end. I wasn't supposed to be at that cafe for long. Just a quick stop after my shift, a cheap cup of coffee before picking up my daughter from my neighbor's place. Life as a single dad doesn't leave much room for lingering. Every minute has a cost. Every decision is measured in diapers, school lunches, and how long you can keep pretending you're not exhausted. I chose the corner table because it was quiet, because I could sit with my thoughts without explaining myself to anyone. That's when I heard her voice crack. "I'm sorry," she said softly, trying to smile through tears she couldn't control. I didn't expect tonight to feel like this." The man across from her sighed, not cruelly, but impatiently, like someone inconvenienced by emotion. "Look, I think maybe you're not ready to date," he said. "This feels like a lot." Something inside my chest tightened. I wasn't eavesdropping, the cafe was small, and pain has a way of traveling through air. She nodded quickly, apologizing again, gathering her purse with hands that betrayed how deeply she was unraveling. When he stood up and muttered something about paying his half later, I watched her crumble the moment he turned his back. She pressed her palms to her eyes, shoulders shaking, completely alone in a room full of people. I should have stayed out of it. I was tired. Broke. Late. But then she whispered something to herself that stopped me cold. "I just wanted someone to see me." Before my brain could catch up to my heart, I stood up and walked toward her table. I didn't sit down. I didn't touch her. I just said, "Hey. I'm sorry. I don't mean to intrude, but, you don't deserve to cry alone." She looked up at me, startled, eyes red and vulnerable, like someone caught in the middle of falling apart. For a second, I thought she'd tell me to leave. Instead, she laughed weakly and said, "Apparently I do." I shook my head. "No. You don't." Something in my voice must have convinced her, because she gestured to the empty chair across from her. 5 minutes, she said. "That's all I can handle." 5 minutes turned into a conversation neither of us expected. Her name was Claire. She spoke carefully, like someone used to being misunderstood. She told me the date was her first in 2 years, that she'd promised herself she was ready, that she wouldn't talk about the past, but the past had a way of leaking out anyway. I didn't tell her much about myself at first. I just listened. Listening is a skill single parents learn quickly. You learn when to speak and when to let silence do the work. When I finally told her I had to go, she nodded, disappointment flickering across her face before she masked it with politeness. I stood, awkwardly unsure of how to end something that felt unfinished. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For sitting with me. You didn't have to." I smiled, a little sadder than I meant to. "Yeah. I did." I walked out thinking that was the end of it. A small, human moment. Nothing more. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I saw her again. This time, she wasn't crying. She was standing outside the same cafe, staring at the window like she was deciding whether to walk in or walk away. She noticed me at the same time, surprise flashing across her face. "You," she said. "The coffee guy." "Still poor," I replied. "Still addicted to caffeine." She laughed, genuinely this time, and the sound hit me harder than I expected. We didn't call it a date. We didn't label anything. We just walked. Talked. Shared pieces of our lives carefully, like people handling something fragile. I told her about my daughter, Lily, about how her mother left when Lily was 2, about how love didn't vanish all at once, it just stopped choosing you. Claire listened the way I had listened to her, with patience, with eyes that didn't flinch when things got heavy. That night, as we stood under a flickering streetlight, she leaned closer and whispered something I hadn't been prepared for. "I didn't cry because he rejected me," she said. "I cried because I realized I was trying to prove I was still worth choosing, after losing my son." My breath caught. "I'm so sorry," I said. She nodded, tears returning but not spilling. "He passed away 3 years ago. Dating feels like betrayal. Like if I move forward, I'm leaving him behind." In that moment, I understood her tears weren't weakness. They were love with nowhere to go. What followed wasn't easy. Loving someone who carries grief is not about fixing them. It's about staying when the weight shows up unannounced. There were nights Claire pulled away, moments she doubted her right to happiness. There were times my own fear surfaced, fear of introducing someone new into Lily's life, fear of building something only to lose it again. The real challenge came when Lily asked, "Is Claire going to disappear too?" That question forced us both to confront the truth. Love isn't about guarantees. It's about presence. Claire didn't promise forever. She promised honesty. She promised to show up even when it was hard. And slowly, carefully, she did. She learned Lily's routines. She listened to her stories. She sat beside me in the messiness of real life, not the polished version people show on first dates. Months later, we went back to that cafe. Same corner table. Same worn chairs. Claire reached across the table, squeezed my hand, and whispered, "That night, you didn't save me." I raised an eyebrow. "No." She smiled, eyes shining. "You reminded me I was still alive." I looked at my life, my daughter laughing, Claire smiling, my heart fuller than I thought possible, and realized something powerful. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness don't just change a night. They change a direction. They turn grief into connection, loneliness into family, and strangers into something that feels like home. And it all began with a woman crying on a blind date, and a whisper that refused to be ignored. What came after that whisper was not a sudden transformation or a perfect beginning. It was slower, heavier, and far more real. Chapter 2 of our story unfolded in the quiet spaces where hope and fear sit side by side, where love doesn't arrive as a solution but as a responsibility. Claire didn't step easily into our lives. She hovered at the edges at first, like someone afraid of casting a shadow where she didn't yet belong. When she came over to my small apartment for the first time, she brought nothing but a book for Lily and an anxious smile that never fully settled. Lily, who had learned too early how to read adults, studied her with careful eyes, measuring intentions the way only a child who's been disappointed before can. That evening was awkward and tender all at once. Lily talked non-stop, filling the room with stories about school and drawings she wanted to show. Claire listened as if every word mattered, crouching down to Lily's level, never rushing her, never forcing affection. I watched from the kitchen doorway, my chest tight with a mix of hope and terror. I had let someone step into our fragile orbit, and I knew there was no undoing that choice. Later that night, after Lily fell asleep, Claire sat on the couch twisting her fingers together. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I don't know how to be close to a child again without being afraid of losing everything." I wanted to tell her it would be okay. I wanted to promise safety. Instead, I told her the truth. "Neither do I," I said. "But we don't have to know everything. We just have to be honest when it's hard." Hard came sooner than expected. There were days when Claire would pull back without warning, her messages shorter, her voice distant. Grief doesn't follow a schedule, and sometimes it showed up in the middle of laughter, cutting conversations short. I learned not to chase her in those moments, but not to disappear either. I learned that loving her meant allowing space without letting silence become abandonment. At the same time, my own insecurities grew louder. I worried constantly that I wasn't enough, that my small apartment, my second-hand furniture, my stretched paychecks and tired eyes would eventually feel like too much. Claire had once had a different life, one filled with plans that ended too soon. I feared she would wake up one day and realize she had stepped backward instead of forward. The breaking point came on a rainy evening when Lily had a school event I couldn't afford to miss. Claire was supposed to come, but an hour before, she called, her voice shaking. "I can't," she said. "I tried, but it feels wrong. Like I'm pretending." I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I hung up and took Lily alone, smiling through the ache in my chest. But that night, after Lily fell asleep, the weight of everything I had been carrying finally pressed down too hard. I wondered if love was asking more of us than we could give. I wondered if kindness was enough to build a future. Claire showed up at my door past midnight, soaked from the rain, eyes swollen from crying. She didn't apologize right away. She just said, I was wrong to run. We talked until dawn. About her son. About the guilt that followed her happiness like a shadow. About my fear of repeating the same loss twice, first with Lily's mother, then with her. There were no dramatic declarations, only quiet truths laid bare. We agreed that grief didn't disqualify her from love, and fear didn't make me weak. They made us human. From that night on, something shifted. Not magically, but steadily. Claire stopped punishing herself for moments of joy. I stopped pretending I was invincible. Lily began to trust in small ways, holding Claire's hand, asking her questions, leaving her drawings on the fridge. Those moments felt bigger than any grand gesture. Months later, life was still messy, still uncertain, but it was fuller. We laughed more. We argued sometimes. We kept choosing each other, even on days when it would have been easier not to. Claire once whispered to me, standing in the kitchen while Lily slept, "I don't feel like I'm replacing what I lost anymore. I feel like I'm honoring it by living." That was when I understood the real meaning of that first whisper in the cafe. It wasn't just about being seen. It was about being allowed to move forward without forgetting where you've been. Love didn't erase our scars. It taught us how to live with them, openly, bravely, together. And that was the ending I never expected, the kind that doesn't promise perfection, but offers something far stronger, a reason to keep going. The third chapter began when the quiet stability we had built was finally tested by the outside world. Until then, our struggles had been private, grief, fear, doubt, all lived behind closed doors. But life has a way of demanding proof, of asking whether what you've built can stand when exposed to judgment, pressure, and loss all at once. It started with a phone call on an ordinary afternoon. Lily's school number flashed on my screen, and before I even answered, my chest tightened. Ordinary days don't call parents unexpectedly. Lily had collapsed during recess, they said. Nothing dramatic, but enough to scare her, enough to scare me. I left work early, heart pounding, every terrible possibility racing through my mind. Claire met me at the clinic without being asked. When I saw her sitting beside Lily, brushing her hair back while whispering reassurances, something inside me shifted permanently. She wasn't visiting our life anymore. She was part of it. Later that night, after Lily fell asleep, the fear I'd been holding back finally broke through. I snapped over something small, a bill, a comment, a suggestion Claire made about changing Lily's routine. The argument surprised us both. It wasn't loud, but it was raw. All the unspoken worries poured out at once. I accused her of not fully committing. She accused me of expecting certainty in a life that had already taught us none exists. That night, she didn't leave, but she didn't stay close either. She slept on the couch, and the space between us felt heavier than any argument. For the first time, I wondered if love alone was enough to bridge the gap between two people shaped by loss. The next morning, Claire made breakfast quietly. Lily wandered in, still sleepy, and climbed onto Claire's lap without hesitation. No question. No fear. Just trust. Claire looked at me over Lily's head, eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. That was when I understood what the fight had really been about. We weren't arguing about money or routines. We were both terrified of how much we stood to lose. The real challenge came weeks later when Lily's mother resurfaced. A message. Then a call. Then a demand to see Lily. It shook the fragile balance we had worked so hard to protect. Claire stepped back instinctively, convinced she was about to become temporary again. I didn't know how to reassure her when I wasn't even sure myself. Lily asked the hardest question of all. Does this mean Claire has to go? That night, Claire cried the way she had cried in the cafe, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet devastation that broke something open inside me. She whispered, "I don't want to be another person who leaves her." For the first time, I didn't try to soften the truth. I told her I was scared too. Scared of conflict. Scared of reopening wounds. Scared of choosing wrong. But I also told her something else, something I had never said out loud before. You're not someone passing through our lives. You're part of them. And I won't let fear decide that for us. The situation with Lily's mother was complicated, painful, and imperfect. There were boundaries. Legal conversations. Tears. But through it all, Claire stayed, not as a replacement, not as competition, but as support. She respected the role she didn't need to fill while never abandoning the role she already had. That balance took strength I hadn't known she possessed. Time moved forward, unevenly but relentlessly. Lily grew more confident. Claire learned to laugh without guilt. I learned to rest without apology. We didn't erase our pasts, we carried them carefully, making room for what came next. The final turning point came quietly, on an ordinary night. Lily fell asleep between us on the couch, her head on Claire's shoulder, her hand tangled in my shirt. Claire looked down at her and whispered something so soft it almost vanished into the air. I think I'm ready to live without asking permission from my grief. I didn't answer right away. I just reached for her hand and held it. That was when I understood what the story had always been about. Not about a blind date gone wrong. Not about a single dad or a grieving mother. It was about the courage to stay open after life teaches you every reason to close yourself off. About choosing love not because it's easy, but because it's honest. The cafe, the tears, the whisper, all of it was just the beginning. The real story was what came after, two broken people building something whole, one ordinary day at a time.